All right, today we're cracking open a really foundational text from what people call the manosphere, Rollo Tomassi's The Rational Male Preventive Medicine. Now, this is a book that's seen as pretty controversial, but for some, it's an absolutely essential guide for guys trying to figure out modern relationships.
The whole thing kicks off with this gut punch of a line in the foreword. It comes from a guy who was successful, who did everything he thought he was supposed to, but he kept getting completely blindsided by breakups. And that one question, where were you? It really sets the stage for the exact problem this book is trying to solve.
And this slide right here is the book's answer. The author, Rollo Tomassi, isn't trying to sell you a simple dating guide. No, he calls it preventative medicine. It's supposed to be a framework to help men see these painful situations coming, to navigate them before they get blindsided.
Okay, so to really get our heads around this, we're going to break it down into 5 key pieces. First, we'll look at the problem as the book defines it. Then, we'll get into this red pill framework. After that, we'll examine the controversial timeline of a woman's life, what the author says drives it, a thing called hypergamy, and finally, the new path he suggests for men.
So what's the actual problem we're talking about? Well, the book identifies this thing that happens all the time. Men, good guys, successful providers, find themselves totally lost when a relationship they thought was rock solid just ends. They played by the rules, did everything society told them to do, and it still blew up in their face.
So what's the fix? The book offers a whole new way of looking at the world, something it calls red pill awareness. And to really get it, you kind of have to learn a whole new vocabulary.
And the heart of it all is this red pill idea, right from the Matrix. The whole concept is that you're waking up to what the book calls a harsh truth about how men and women interact. A reality, it argues, has been covered up by social rules that, tend to put the female perspective first.
This leads us to what the book claims is the master key to understanding everything: hypergamy. It's not just about marrying up in terms of money. It's defined here as this deep, instinctual drive in women to find the absolute best deal she can. A man who's both exciting and attractive, the alpha, but also a reliable and stable provider, the beta.
So how do you even measure this stuff? The framework uses a concept called sexual market value, or SMV. Think of it like your personal stock price in the dating world. And here's a huge claim the book makes: that stock price trends in totally different directions for men and women as they get older.
And this slide really lays out the inner conflict of hypergamy, at least according to the book. You've got the alpha fucks on one side. That's the guy who brings the thrills, the excitement for short-term fun. On the other side, you've got the beta bucks, the provider, the guy who brings stability and security for the long haul. The book argues a woman's ideal is to get both in one person, but a lot of the time she has to pick one or get them in sequence.
Okay, so how does all this theory turn into preventative medicine? This is where it gets really controversial. The book maps out a timeline, arguing that what a woman looks for in a partner changes in really predictable ways as she goes through life.
And here it is, maybe one of the book's most provocative ideas put into a simple chart. The claim is that a woman's sexual market value, her SMV, hits its absolute peak in her early 20s, driven mostly by youth and fertility. But for a man, his SMV is said to peak way later, in his late 30s, after he's had time to build up his status, his confidence, and his resources.
So, the book slices up a woman's life into these 4 main phases, and it argues each one is driven by a totally different set of priorities based on her shifting SMV and her life goals. Let's walk through them.
First up, what he calls the party years. This is from the late teens to the late 20s, and it's framed as a woman's absolute peak SMV. According to the book, the focus here is all about having options, having fun, and prioritizing those exciting alpha traits. Long-term security? That's way, way on the back burner. But then comes what the author calls the epiphany phase, right around age 28 to 30. This is presented as this massive turning point. It's a sudden realization that her SMV isn't what it used to be, and she's feeling this competition anxiety with younger women. The book claims this is when the switch flips and the strategy shifts from seeking short-term fun to locking down a long-term provider.
And this quote is supposedly the soundtrack to that phase. The idea is that the pressure on men to commit, to provide, to just man up, gets turned up to 11,
because, as the book claims, she feels that biological and social clock ticking and needs to secure a long-term partner.
So after that epiphany, the priority becomes the beta bucks guy, the provider. But it doesn't just stop there. The book talks about a 7-year itch, where she reevaluates the choice she made. This can then lead into a later redevelopment phase, a time when she either makes peace with her choice or, well, maybe starts thinking about a different path altogether.
So what's the engine driving this entire timeline? What makes it all go? Well, according to the book, it all circles back to that one core idea we talked about earlier, the relentless, non-stop engine of hypergamy.
And to explain why there's so much conflict, the book offers up this cardinal rule. It basically argues that male and female mating strategies are fundamentally opposed. For one to win, the other has to lose, or at least compromise. It paints relationships as this constant negotiation, sometimes even a zero-sum game.
Now, this is so important to get. This isn't presented as a conscious choice people make. The book argues that hypergamy is a result of our deep evolutionary biology. It's described as an unchangeable psychological firmware that's running in the background, underneath all our modern social rules.
So, after laying all this out, this whole complex framework, what's the actual prescription? What is the preventive medicine? Well, the last part of the book lays out a new path for men to walk, one that's based on having this red pill awareness.
And the advice really boils down to these 4 steps. First, you have to understand the timeline and what drives it. Second, you have to make yourself the priority. Your mission in life, not a relationship, should be your center. Third, you have to actually become that high-value guy, not just pretend. And finally, and this is maybe the most important part, you have to maintain your frame, which means living by your reality and having her join you in it, not the other way around.
This last quote from the author himself really sums up the whole mission of the book. He's not just sharing ideas. He sees it as a critical warning that he has a duty to pass on to other men, to hopefully save them from the pain and confusion he believes is almost guaranteed without this knowledge.
And that really just leaves us with this one big question, right? Does a framework like this, that tries to predict human behavior so mechanically, actually give guys real useful clarity? Or does it create its own kind of prison, a psychological trap filled with suspicion and cynicism, by making you focus so much on strategy and value? That's really the question you have to ask yourself after taking all this in.